What does a newfangled potato chip have in common with fake movie stars and a Cold War cocktail party? They all happened this week in history. Welcome back to the Bartender's Almanack. If you're new to the channel, my name is John. I had my first professional bar shift at the age of 19, and I've been a pretty serious cocktail and spirits nerd for the last 2 decades. On this channel, we go deep on the humans and the legends behind what winds up in our glass and on our plate. Let's get into it. It's the birthday of a guy, you'd never know his name, but for sure you've enjoyed one of his creations. He was a scientist named Frederick John Bauer, born in Toledo, Ohio this week in 1918. Graduated from the University of Toledo before getting a master's and a PhD from the Ohio State University. PhD in hand, Fred Bauer served in the U.S. Navy, studying the physiology of the Navy's early fighter pilots. His course of research was known as aviation physiology, basically meaning he studied all the human physiology factors that influence a fighter pilot's performance in any number of wartime scenarios. Hypoxia, for example, meaning oxygen deprivation, pressure changes inside the aircraft, all kinds of things like that. While he didn't work directly with the aviators, his research, which happened during World War II and immediately after that, helped inform design details on every kind of airplane produced since the mid-20th century. But that's not why we care about him. We're here to talk about food and beverage. When he left the Navy in the late 1940s, Fred Bauer went to work as a food scientist for Procter & Gamble. They say talent hits a target nobody else can hit, but genius hits a target nobody else can see. Well, Fred Bauer became obsessed with packaging, of all things, specifically to keep food fresher for longer. One of his obscure obsessions was that potato chips were always getting crushed in the bag. Very few people gave much concern to this particular problem, but you gotta love a nerd on a mission. Want to know how Dr. Bauer solved this dilemma? He used a geometric formula that was crush resistant, and he looked everywhere for inspiration. This was the mid-20th century, and cowboys were all over the movies and television, and thus it was the shape of a cowboy's saddle that Dr. Bauer found to be the most crush-resistant. After all, if it can hold the weight of a man, bouncing on it, running across the prairie, well, there's some structural integrity there. And Dr. Bauer worked with other food scientists to break down and reconstitute potatoes as well, so that the chips were all the same shape, that of the saddle, and this uniformity made them stackable. Given how handy that was, Dr. Bauer developed a package in a crush-resistant tube just to sell them in. In the late 1960s, they released a limited run of these snacks in a small market in Indiana. It went so well that in 1968, the product hit the broader U.S. market under the name Pringles Newfangled Potato Chips. At first, the idea of chip uniformity didn't exactly take off. There were a lot of people who enjoyed the fun of hunting around the bag for the big ones, for the folded ones, or for the multiple chips that get stuck together in the fryer. Hell, there were people who enjoyed the crushed bits at the bottom of the bag. You ever use those to bread a chicken cutlet? It's pretty dang good. But in the end, the saddle shape won over American consumers, and Pringles have been on the store shelves all across the country now for nearly 60 years. There are a few theories on the origin of the name of the brand Pringles. One theory starts and ends with the fact that a man named Mark Pringle had done some work for Procter & Gamble on dehydrating potatoes in the 1930s. In March of 1937, Mark Pringle filed a patent application entitled Method and Apparatus for Processing Potatoes. The other theory relies on the notion that 2 Procter & Gamble ad executives lived on the same street just north of Cincinnati, and that street was called Pringle Drive. Hell, maybe it was both, or maybe it was something else altogether, and we may never really know the true origin of the name Pringles, but we know it was Dr. Fred Bauer who created the final product that shows up at damn near every campground and picnic in the Western world. Sadly, in his later years, Fred Bauer was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. That fight was a long and losing battle, and Dr. Bauer died in the summer of 2008. In their obituary, Time magazine wrote the following about the good Dr. Fred Bauer. If there were a junk food hall of fame, the Pringles can would stand proudly next to the Toblerone pyramid in the exhibition on ingenious packaging shapes. Bauer's canister has become a treasured symbol of snack culture around the globe as recognizable as the Hershey bar or a Coke can from Argentina to Zambia. Many years before Alzheimer's set in, Fred Bauer had joked with his son, saying when the time came, he might want to have his ashes buried in a Pringles can. And so it was. In the summer of 2008, Dr. Bauer's family was on the way to the funeral parlor when someone remembered that silly remark. The family stopped at a local Walgreens. They bought a can of original flavor Pringles, and they hopped back in the car. Full of both emotion and admiration, the Bauer family enjoyed the contents of that random tube before giving Frederick John Bauer his final wish. In 2012, just 4 years after the death of Dr. Fred Bauer, Procter & Gamble sold the Pringles brand to Kellogg's for nearly $2.7 billion. That acquisition alone elevated Kellogg's to being the world's second largest snack food company. Kellogg's now has created over 100 different flavors of Pringles sold all across the world. And if you want to know how they all taste, you can just check out a YouTube channel called Good Mythical Morning. In episode number 1854, GMM hosts Rhett and Link tried them all. They ranked them all, and they came up with a winner. I do believe Fred Bauer would have been mighty proud. I'm never going to get too political on this channel, but this next story has a distinctly geopolitical backdrop. And to tell it, we got to travel back in time just a bit to March 12, 1947. That's when President Harry S. Truman declared his support for nations that were being threatened by the Soviet Union. In June of that same year, the Marshall Plan was announced, which aimed to rebuild and stabilize Europe after the horrors of World War II. But it was also seen as a Western countermeasure to the influence of the Soviet Union. These two events are commonly seen as the beginning of the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. In the decades after this, the U.S. made a number of important technological advancements, as well as significant public and private investment gains. The U.S. economy surged in those years, and many of the most visible technological achievements came from NASA. In those same decades, the Soviet government did not foster that same innovation, and conditions for the Soviet citizens generally declined. But the Soviet government did invest heavily in aerospace, which is why they famously got a man into orbit before America did. Now fast forward just a bit to the early 1970s when both NASA and the Soviets were regularly putting men into space for days at a time. There's a story going around that at one point the orbital paths of both the Apollo capsule and the Soviet Soyuz capsule may have come close enough to one another that the astronauts and the cosmonauts could see each other through their tiny little windows. I'm not able to verify that story, but one way or another, an idea of cooperation was hatched. And it was this week back in 1975 when the Soviet Soyuz orbiter actually docked with the American Apollo orbiter. This was a highly symbolic moment of détente between the two nations, and it made news the world around. In fact, there's a video of Walter Cronkite talking about the red light and the white light passing above in the night sky. At approximately 135 miles above the surface of the Earth, American astronauts entered the Soyuz, and later the Soviet cosmonauts were invited aboard the Apollo orbiter. During these visits, there was a ceremonial meal. The Americans were treated to Russian borscht and toast, and there were some cameras on board, but it was stills and not video, so most of the exchange went uncaptured. Here on the 50th anniversary of that unbelievable occasion of peaceful cooperation and unyielding humanity, I wish I could tell you for sure what they drank, but 50 years worth of persistent rumors suggests that there was vodka. I can't prove it, but I do believe this would for sure be the highest altitude toast of all time. And as a guy who both regrets and resists all the poisonous political division we humans are capable of, I can damn sure raise a glass of my own to the fact that putting opposing forces at a table with even the simplest food and drink is a good start to help solve just about any problem we humans can create for ourselves. I like to think we can all raise a glass to that. And now for a little taste of Hollywood. It was on this date in 2004 that a little show called Entourage premiered on HBO. Largely inspired by the life of the show's executive producer, big screen superstar Mark Wahlberg, it was a fictionalized account of the meteoric rise of a young movie star who brought his childhood best friends along for that wild and glamorous ride. It's worth noting that a ton of TV shows had come before Entourage trying to pull back the curtain and show what life is like for Hollywood celebrities, but none of them really did it right, and certainly none of them lasted long enough for anyone to remember them. That is, until Entourage came around. Entourage did it so well, in fact, that HBO gave them 8 seasons and a full-length motion picture. If you haven't seen Entourage and you need a good binge, move this one to the top of your list. While he was rolling ideas over in advance of the 7th season, the show's creator Doug Elan found himself in a hot tub in Nantucket with a friend named Ken Austin. Ken was a businessman who had a new tequila brand coming out. The topic wasn't so much the tequila, it was that Doug Elan needed a good story for one of the main characters, a guy called Turtle. Turtle was a lovable loser who always seemed to come up short, and Doug Elan really just wanted to give Turtle a big win. Ken made a sideways remark from which hatched an idea that had never ever been tried before. Doug Elan wrote a season-long through line into the series where Turtle had a chance to invest some money in a tequila brand. Ken Austin already had a name in mind for his brand, making this perhaps the most clever and unique product launch in the history of the alcoholic beverage industry. This major hit television show fictionalized the launch of a real brand of tequila, and it was called Avión. This wasn't done for the tequila, mind you, it was done for the character on Doug Elan's show. But in the end, it wound up placing Avión into the vocabulary of everyone who regularly asked their bartender for some tequila. But not at first. When Avión's name was being spoken by the characters on Entourage, the brand only picked up about 2,000 new followers on social media. The problem was, everyone assumed Avión had just been made up by the television show and by the folks at HBO and would not truly be available for sale. The Avión marketing team did what any good marketing team does. They pivoted. They changed their marketing slogan. It had earlier been "Taste Elevated," and they changed it to "Yes, it's real." And that worked so well, in fact, that in January 2018, the brand was purchased by French spirits conglomerate Pernod Ricard, who, by the way, also own Absolut Vodka, Perrier Jouet Champagne, and Jameson's Irish Whiskey. A note about timing here, by the way. Here we are 8 years after the Pernod Ricard purchase and more than 16 years after Entourage launched the brand, and thirsty tequila drinkers can still find Avión damn near everywhere. I haven't had it in a little while because I work in a whiskey bar, but I did some events for Pernod Ricard back in the day. Actually, here's a picture of me on the Key West cocktail cruise doing a party for Pernod, and I do remember really enjoying it. For the record, Pernod hasn't paid me to do anything since this picture was taken, maybe like 10 years ago, so this is just me telling you that I made some great cocktails with it. And by the way, if you do decide to binge Entourage, pay special attention to Season 7, because Turtle may or may not have finally gotten his big win. That's it for this week's Bartender's Almanack. We're a really young channel, so it would really help us out a lot if you would please take a second and just hit that subscribe button. It's free for you, but it means the world to us. And the last note, as always, thanks for stopping by. Stay classy, and we'll see you on the next one.